Hello, fam. Welcome to The Real Place, a place where real women share real stories. Before we dive into this beautiful story, please kindly subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts below. I should have left the moment Emma fell asleep on his couch. Should have scooped up my daughter and driven straight home to our safe, predictable evening routine. Instead, I found myself accepting James's offer of tea, settling into the worn leather chair across from him while Emma's gentle breathing filled the comfortable silence. "She worked so hard tonight," he said, adjusting the throw blanket around her small frame. The tenderness in his gesture made something flutter in my chest, a feeling I'd forgotten I was capable of. "She's been different since starting with you. More alive, I guess." The words slipped out before I could catch them, revealing more than I intended about both Emma and myself. James looked up from where he'd been dimming the lamp. "And what about you, Miranda? When was the last time you felt alive?" The question hit like a physical blow. I stared into my tea, watching steam rise and dissipate, buying time I didn't have. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." His voice was gentle but insistent. "I see how you move through the world like you're afraid to take up space. Like you're apologizing for existing." I wanted to laugh it off, to deflect with some comment about single motherhood being exhausting. But something in his eyes, a recognition, maybe, made my carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. "David used to say I was too intense," I whispered, surprised by my own honesty. "Too much feeling, too much thinking. I learned to make myself smaller." James leaned forward, and I could smell his cologne, cedar, and something warm I couldn't name. "Maybe the problem wasn't that you were too much. Maybe the problem was that he wasn't enough." The words hung between us like a bridge I was terrified to cross. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized with stunning clarity that I wanted him to reach for me. Wanted to know what it felt like to be seen as too much and chosen anyway. But Emma stirred on the couch, and reality crashed back. I was a widow, a mother, sitting in another man's living room wanting things I had no right to want. I stood too quickly, mumbling something about getting late. But as I gathered Emma in my arms, James's hand brushed mine, and I felt electricity shoot straight through my carefully constructed numbness. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and internal chaos. I'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and there was no going back to pretending I was just Emma's mother, just David's widow, just someone going through the motions of living. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my body humming with an energy I'd thought was gone forever. 6 a.m. Coffee brewing, toast browning, Emma's lunch assembled with military precision. I moved through our morning routine like a ghost haunting her own life, each action performed with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd forgotten why any of it mattered. "Mom, you're burning the toast again." Emma's voice cut through my haze. I looked down at the smoking bread, another small failure in an endless string of them. "Sorry, sweetheart. I'll make more." She watched me scrape blackened crumbs into the sink, her 10-year-old eyes holding too much understanding. "Are you okay?" The question I fielded daily, answered with the same rehearsed lie. "Of course. Just tired." But tired wasn't the right word. Tired implied I'd been expending energy, fighting something. This was different, a profound emptiness that had settled into my bones like winter cold. I functioned, paid bills, attended parent-teacher conferences, but I didn't live. I existed in the spaces between responsibilities, a placeholder in my own story. At work, I processed insurance claims with the same detached efficiency I brought to everything else. Mrs. Henderson's kitchen fire, Mr. Martinez's fender bender, Other people's disasters filtered through my desk like background noise. I approved payments, denied fraudulent claims, and felt nothing about any of it. Miranda, could you stay a few minutes? My supervisor's voice startled me from my stupor. I nodded, already composing explanations for whatever I'd done wrong. Janet perched on the edge of my desk, her expression concerned rather than critical. I've been watching you lately. You do excellent work, but... She paused, searching for words. When's the last time you took time for yourself? Really took care of yourself? The question felt foreign, almost nonsensical. Taking care of myself? I kept Emma fed, clothed, and safe. I showed up to work, paid the mortgage, remembered to water David's roses. What else was there? I'm fine, I said automatically. Janet's smile was gentle but unconvinced. Being fine isn't the same as being happy, Miranda. And you deserve to be happy. Driving home, her words echoed in my head. Happy. The concept felt as distant as a foreign language I'd once known but forgotten. When had I last felt genuinely happy? Not grateful, not content, not merely surviving, but truly, deeply happy? I couldn't remember. That evening, Emma announced her math grades were slipping. She needed help I couldn't provide, tutoring I couldn't afford. As I watched her struggle with homework at our kitchen table, I saw my own defeat reflected in her frustrated tears. We were both drowning in our separate ways, and I was too numb to save either of us. The coffee shop on Maple Street buzzed with Thursday morning energy, laptops clicking, conversations blending into white noise, the comforting routine of strangers avoiding eye contact. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always, clutching my notepad with questions about Emma's tutoring needs. James walked in like he owned the space, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. He was different than I'd expected, younger, more animated, with paint stains on his fingers and an easy smile that made something flutter unexpectedly in my chest. Miranda? He extended his hand, and his grip was warm, confident. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder. He wasn't late, but I didn't correct him. Instead, I found myself studying his face as he settled into the chair across from me, ordering coffee without looking at the menu, clearly irregular. So tell me about Emma, he said, leaning forward with genuine interest. What makes her tick? I'd prepared a clinical summary, grades, weak areas, study habits. But something in his expectant expression made me pause. She's brilliant, actually, but she's scared. Scared of making mistakes, of not being perfect. She'd rather not try than risk failing. James nodded slowly, understanding flickering in his dark eyes. Smart kids often are. They've learned that being right feels safe. He stirred sugar into his coffee, movements deliberate and graceful. But math isn't about being right. It's about finding patterns, discovering connections. It's about being curious enough to get things wrong until you stumble onto something beautiful. The way he talked about mathematics, like it was poetry, like it was alive, made me lean closer despite myself. I'd never heard anyone speak with such passion about anything, let alone numbers and equations. You really love teaching, I said, not quite a question. His smile was rueful. I love learning. Teaching is just sharing the addiction, I guess. When a kid finally gets it, when you see that moment of connection light up their face, there's nothing like it. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt that kind of enthusiasm about anything. The void where that feeling should have been felt suddenly sharp, painful. What about you? He asked. What lights you up? The question caught me off guard. I work in insurance. That's what you do, not who you are. His eyes were kind but persistent. What makes Miranda tick? I stared into my untouched latte, foam heart dissolving into abstract patterns. I honestly don't remember anymore. The admission hung between us, more vulnerable than I'd intended. James didn't fill the silence with platitudes or advice. He just waited, creating space for whatever came next. "I'd like to work with Emma," he said finally. "And maybe you could figure out what lights you up while I help her discover she's braver than she thinks." Something in my chest loosened for the first time in months. 3 weeks later, my kitchen had transformed into something I barely recognized. Where once only the efficient dance of meal prep and homework supervision had occurred, now there was laughter. Real laughter, the kind that bubbled up from somewhere deep and surprised you with its force. Emma sat at our dining table, pencil poised over graph paper, while James explained coordinate planes with the enthusiasm of someone describing buried treasure. I stood at the counter making dinner, hyper-aware of every word, every gesture, every moment his presence filled our space with something I'd forgotten homes could hold. "See, Emma, every point has a story," he was saying, sketching lines with confident strokes. "This one here? He's an adventurer who traveled 4 spaces east and 3 spaces north to find his treasure." "What kind of treasure?" Emma asked, completely absorbed. "Whatever he needed most. Maybe friendship. Maybe courage. Maybe just the knowledge that he could make the journey." I nearly dropped the wooden spoon I was holding. There was something in his voice, a weight that suggested he wasn't just talking about mathematical coordinates. When I glanced over, his eyes met mine for just a moment, long enough for me to see recognition there, understanding that we were all searching for our own treasures. After Emma went to bed, James lingered to discuss her progress. This had become our routine, these conversations that started with fractions and somehow meandered into territory I'd sworn never to revisit. "She's getting more confident," he said, accepting the cup of tea I offered. "Less afraid of making mistakes." "Good." I settled into the chair across from him, noting how natural this felt, how easily we'd fallen into this rhythm. "She needs to learn it's okay to be imperfect. What about you?" The question was gentle but pointed. "When did you learn that lesson?" I laughed, but it came out bitter. "I didn't. I learned the opposite. That mistakes have consequences. That imperfection gets you." I stopped, horrified by what I'd almost revealed. "Gets you what, Miranda?" The kindness in his voice was my undoing. "Left behind. Criticized. Made to feel like you're asking for too much just by existing." James set down his teacup with deliberate care. "David." The name felt strange in his mouth. I nodded, unable to speak around the sudden tightness in my throat. "He was wrong," James said simply, "about you being too much. I've been coming here for weeks, and I've watched you with Emma, seen how you move through the world. You're not too much. You're not even close to enough." The words hit me like a physical blow, but in the best possible way. Like someone had finally given me permission to take up the space I'd been apologizing for occupying. "I don't know how to be more," I whispered. "You don't have to know how. You just have to be willing." The shift was subtle at first. James arriving 5 minutes early, lingering 10 minutes longer. Our conversations moving from Emma's homework to everything else. Books we'd read, places we'd traveled, dreams we'd abandoned. I found myself choosing outfits more carefully on tutoring days, applying lipstick I hadn't worn since David's funeral. "You look nice today," Emma said one Thursday morning, tilting her head with 10-year-old curiosity. "Different." I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, softer somehow, more present.
Doi. Yeah.
Like you're actually here instead of just around. Out of the mouths of babes. I was more here, more alive in my own skin than I'd been in years.
And it terrified me.
That afternoon, James brought Emma a book about famous female mathematicians. For inspiration, he said, but his eyes found mine over her head, and I felt the familiar flutter that had become my constant companion. While Emma devoured stories of women who'd changed the world with equations, James and I prepared dinner together, a development so natural I barely questioned when it had started happening. Our movements around each other in the small kitchen were choreographed by some instinct I didn't recognize, a dance of reaching and retreating, of hands brushing as we passed utensils, of shoulders touching when we both leaned over the stove. "You're a good cook," he said, tasting the sauce I'd been stirring. "David always said I used too much garlic." David was wrong about a lot of things. The words were quiet but firm, and when I looked up, James was closer than I'd realized. Close enough that I could see gold flecks in his brown eyes, close enough that the scent of his cologne made my knees unsteady. We stayed like that for a heartbeat too long, the air between us charged with possibility. Then Emma called from the dining room, asking for help with the problem, and the spell broke. But it didn't disappear. It hummed beneath the surface of every interaction, growing stronger each week. When James laughed at something I said, really laughed, I felt beautiful for the first time in years. When he asked my opinion about books or current events, I remembered I had a mind worth engaging. When he listened, really listened, to my thoughts without interrupting or correcting, I felt valuable in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I started looking forward to Tuesdays and Thursdays with an intensity that scared me. Started checking my reflection before he arrived. Started preparing conversation topics like I was studying for an exam. The rational part of my brain whispered warnings about becoming emotionally dependent on someone who was essentially an employee, but I was addicted to feeling awake again, to remembering I was more than just Emma's mother or David's widow. I was Miranda, and for the first time in years, that felt like enough. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I lay in bed staring at David's side, still his side, even after 2 years, replaying every moment in James's apartment. The way he'd looked at me when he asked about feeling alive. The electricity when our hands touched. The realization that I'd wanted him to kiss me, had been disappointed when he didn't. The guilt was suffocating, not just for wanting another man, but for the more complicated truth slowly surfacing. I felt more connected to James after 6 weeks than I'd felt to David in the final years of our marriage. Our marriage. I forced myself to think about it honestly for the first time since the accident. The comfortable routine we'd fallen into, the way conversations had dwindled to logistics and small talk. The way David's criticism had become background noise I'd learned to tune out. The way I'd made myself smaller and smaller until I'd almost disappeared entirely. His death had preserved us in amber. The grieving widow, the devoted husband, the perfect love story cut short. But it hadn't been perfect, had it? We'd been 2 people living parallel lives, intersecting only when necessary, both too proud or too tired to admit we'd grown apart. The revelation should have destroyed me. Instead, it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. I got up, paced to the window, looked out at the street where James lived 3 blocks away. Was he awake too? Was he thinking about the moment we'd almost crossed a line neither of us was ready to acknowledge? My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from him. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable tonight." That wasn't my intention. I stared at the screen for 10 minutes before responding. "You didn't." but I think we need to talk.
Yes.
We do. The conversation happened 2 days later, over coffee at our usual place. Neither of us addressed it directly. We were both too careful for that. Instead, we talked around it, dancing with words that meant more than they said. "Emma's doing so well with you," I began. "She's a remarkable kid. Takes after her mother." James. His name felt different in my mouth now, weighted with possibility and danger. "I need you to know that you feel it too?" His voice was gentle but certain. "Miranda, I've been trying to stay professional, to keep appropriate boundaries. But I can't stop thinking about you, about us." The words hung between us like a confession and a question all at once. I looked into my coffee, then back at his face. Open, vulnerable, waiting. "I'm not ready," I said finally. "But I'm not ready to stop either." He nodded, understanding immediately. We would continue this careful dance, this exploration of possibility that felt both inevitable and impossible. Because some things couldn't be controlled, couldn't be planned or prevented. Some things simply were, whether we were ready for them or not. 6 months later, I sat in the same coffee shop where James and I first met, but everything had changed. The woman who had walked in here that first day, numb, going through the motions, convinced she was broken beyond repair, felt like a stranger I'd once known. Emma was thriving. Her confidence in math had spilled over into every area of her life, and she attacked challenges now with the enthusiasm of someone who'd learned that mistakes were just stepping stones to understanding. More importantly, she was happy. Really, truly happy, in a way I hadn't seen since before David died. "You're different too, Mom," she told me last week. "You smile with your eyes now." She was right. I'd started therapy, rejoined my book club, even went to dinner with a colleague from work. I was rediscovering parts of myself I'd thought were lost forever, reclaiming space I'd forgotten I was allowed to occupy. But always, I came back to James. We'd been careful, deliberate, honest about the complexity of our situation. We talked about David, about grief, about the difference between healing and hiding. I'd learned that honoring my husband's memory didn't mean preserving myself in the state he'd left me in. It meant growing, becoming, living fully enough for both of us. James understood this in a way that amazed me. He never tried to replace David or erase him from our story. Instead, he helped me integrate that love into a larger narrative, one where I was allowed to love again, differently but no less deeply. Today felt different, though. Significant. As he walked into the coffee shop with that same easy confidence I'd noticed 6 months ago, I knew I was ready for the conversation we'd been circling around for weeks. "Hi," he said, settling into the chair across from me with a smile that still made my heart skip.
Eat.
I reached across the table and took his hand, no longer afraid of the electricity that sparked between us. "I have something to tell you." His eyebrows raised, patient and encouraging. "I've been thinking about what you said that first night, about feeling alive." I took a breath, steadying myself. "I know what lights me up now." "Yeah? What's that?" "Possibility."
Growth.
"The kind of love that makes you more yourself instead of less." I squeezed his hand, marveling at how natural this felt. "I'm ready, James. Not just to move forward, but to run toward whatever comes next." His smile was radiant, transformative. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure I'm tired of being afraid. I'm sure I want to find out what happens when two people choose each other despite all the reasons it's complicated." I paused, then added with a laugh that came from somewhere deep and joyful. "I'm sure I want to discover what our coordinates look like on this map." He brought my hand to his lips, pressed a gentle kiss to my knuckles. Then let's see where this adventure takes us. As we walked out of the coffee shop together, his arm around my waist, I felt the future opening before us like a story I was finally brave enough to write. What would you have done in her situation? Have you ever felt drawn towards something unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, there are more like it waiting. Subscribe and hit the bell to never miss these thoughtful stories about the complexity of being a woman in today's world. Because sometimes the stories we're hesitant to share are the ones that matter most.